energy has served the foundation for every country's development and also for every household.
We have got to find a new technology which is not fossil fuels to provide abundant energy in future.
Now, some people, especially from the politics part, they would like to amplify the national security part or your sort of PV.
I think what Europe has to do is to try to get a more intelligent way where there will be a minority of products and services where there is a national security concern and there will be constraints on both trade and investment.
Now we have seen a lot of developing countries, they're kind of trapped into kind of a dilemma because they are pushing their economy and they need kind of fossil fuel.
Over the last 5 years, driven by China, is this dramatic reduction in the cost of both solar and batteries.
For the zero carbon society or life, what does it mean?
I think the electrified society is a greener society, not just in terms of we're stopping climate change, but also in lots of aspects of our local environment and the quality of life we lead.
Actually, energy has served the foundation for every country's development and also for every household and for every winter. We know in China, in the northern parts, we need the heating system with the coal-fired power plants, and also in Europe, we need some kind of coal power plants and also the gas power plants for the heating system, especially when the winter comes. But now we have seen this kind of energy crisis in Europe, mainly because of the gas supply. Do you think that is the kind of the short-term problem or is kind of a systematic problem?
I think it's a short-term problem. Look, you're absolutely right to start with the fundamental importance of energy. And of course, that energy was coming from horses, from water wheels, and from human muscles. And we had all across the world, in China, in Europe, very low standards of living. We then discovered the ability to use fossil fuels, first of all coal and then oil and gas. We use now across the world, 15, 20 times as much energy as we did then. And we would not have achieved the growth of prosperity without that growth of energy. So energy is fundamental to human welfare and prosperity. The challenge, of course, is that at the moment we get 80% or so of our energy starts as fossil fuels, and it is causing, burning it, huge problems of climate change. So we have got to find a new technology which is not fossil fuels to provide abundant energy in future. And the good news, and we have to keep coming back to this good news, is that over the long term, we know the answer. The answer is electrify, electrify, electrify. We just need to electrify as much of our economy as possible, and we need to produce all of the electricity we produce in a zero carbon fashion. And there's no mystery about this. We know what these technologies are. They're batteries and EVs and heat pumps for residential heating. So in my house in London, I have got rid of the gas boiler, and now I have a heat pump.
It's all electrified.
I have two houses. One of them is not yet electrified, the other is, but we will soon be all
in the
electrified.
Transition part.
But we're in the transition pathway. But one basically has to end up all electrified. Residential heating electrified, road transport electrified, a lot of industrial heating electrified, and make it zero carbon. Now, that's where we need to end up, and we need all to agree strategies of how to go there as fast as possible. But of course, when you haven't got there, and you get a crisis like the Russia-Ukraine crisis and the increase in gas prices, we're suddenly faced with much higher gas prices and people feel poorer. But if we had made more progress in developing our renewables or our nuclear, we wouldn't have been so vulnerable to that price shock. So to me, the lesson for Europe, for instance, of the Russia-Ukraine war influence on energy prices is that we have to speed the transition to get away from gas and oil as our energy sources and move through to renewables and nuclear. Because in renewables and nuclear, you don't have to import. Every country in the world can have its own renewables and nuclear. It's the way to greater energy security.
You just mentioned about the nuclear power plants, but now we also see there is a trend in Europe that we don't need this kind of nuclear power plants. We need like a solar, wind, or other renewables, just no nuclear power. And also because of the heating system, people, for example, some countries like Hungary or some other Central Eastern European countries, they are still relying on the gas, and because gas is about the food industry, it's about other industries. So how do you see this kind of trend that people getting to restart like coal power plants, or they consider to restart this kind of nuclear power plant, and also the complaints?
No, let's be clear. Europe is moving beyond coal fast now. The UK now has no coal plants at all.
So there will be no reverse.
No, there's going to be absolutely no reverse, and no chance of a reverse. We've closed them down. We've deconstructed them. They won't work any longer. And across Europe, Europe will be, by 2040, the whole of the European Union will have no coal plants whatsoever. Even by 2030, there'll be none in France. There'll be none in Spain. There'll be a few in Poland. I mean, Europe is moving beyond coal very, very fast, and it's completely irreversible. And we don't need that. Nuclear is different. Nuclear is clean. There was a period in which members of the green movements were anti-nuclear. I think they were wrong to do that. I think we've moved beyond that. Nuclear in Europe is still quite expensive. So I don't think it's sensible for us to use nuclear as the core of our system. I think we'll probably end up with power systems in Europe where maybe 20% of our electricity comes from nuclear, but the majority, 60 or 70%, will come from renewables. So it's not an either or. You don't have to be binary. You don't have to make an absolute decision. We can have both. But I think in most countries in Europe, it will be primarily wind, solar, hydro, and some nuclear. And that is a balanced and diversified system. So I'm happy that we're going to head in that direction. Coal has gone from the UK finally. And it's a very interesting thing, that, because the first industrial revolution in the world occurred in Britain. Right? We had an industrial revolution. It depended crucially on coal, and the UK now burns no grams of coal to produce power whatsoever. Zero, absolute zero, and it'll be zero from now till the end of time.
You just mentioned about the coal-powered plants, and we know here in China, we are going to have this kind of energy transition from the traditional energy to more renewables, but also because China has a huge population, and also about the heating system, the traditional energy, for example, the coal-fired power plants still occupies a portion, and there are some doubts about that. But from my personal experience previously working for the energy companies, actually now we have a lot of technologies to have the clean coal power plants, and we have the technology to to grasp the carbon emission and to lower all these parts. So what would be the challenges?
The two technologies you've mentioned are not fundamental. You can have cleaner coal. You can make it more efficient.
Yes.
You can also make it more flexible, so that you can run it up and down inversely to when the renewables. Those are all good things to do, but those things themselves will never produce low carbon electricity, right? Even if you run the most efficient, what's called ultra supercritical power plant in the world, you will never get the grams per kilowatt hour. You'll never get them below 550. Right?
So the solution could be increase the gas part.
No, well, maybe the gas, but in the long run, it's renewables. And what has happened over the last 5 years, driven by China, is this dramatic reduction in the cost of both solar and batteries. And we're now at the stage where solar plus batteries together can actually give you electricity all the way through the day and the night, right, round the clock electricity. And that is a breakthrough. And I think what we're going to see increasingly is that will dominate the system. Now, up until now, what has happened in the UK and what has happened in China is we've built a lot of renewables, but we need thermal plant, either coal or in the UK it's now gas, to be available when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow.
And also about the hydropower.
And the hydropower.
Kind of storage.
Hydropower is great storage. So, but so far we've needed thermal plant alongside it to balance the system.
Yeah.
We are now moving, because of battery energy storage, into an environment where a lot of that balancing problem, we don't need the thermal plant too. Now, what will happen in China is, I think for a long period of time, you won't close down the coal plants, but you'll run them less and less.
Yeah, to minimize
the capacity utilization will run. There'll start being things which switch on during, very, very cold spells in winter or very, very hot periods in summer where you're short of renewables. But gradually over time, you'll find that some of them have no use at all and you'll close them down. So it's not an instantaneous transition, but I think the vision for China by, say, 2045, I would think by China in 2045, you should aim to have no coal power generation. And I think you can have a system which is nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, maybe a little bit of gas, and you'll have a system that can work, that can deliver round-the-clock renewable electricity on demand for all Chinese citizens at a good price.
And also we have this kind of power storage system, and you just mentioned about the price, because for most of the people, when we talk about energy, many people are not that familiar about how much carbon dioxide we got emissions and about the climate change, something. But people care more about the blue skies and also about
the local pollution.
And also about the price of the energy, because now we are facing this kind of inflation. So what would be the top challenges when we push this kind of transition? Do you think the prices matter a lot?
No, I don't think the price will go. I think prices do matter. But let's be clear. In China here, today, the cheapest way to produce a kilowatt hour of electricity is not coal.
Yeah.
It is solar or wind. That's the cheapest way.
I think also for hydro, right?
Hydro as well. Hydro will also be cheap. And actually your nuclear is quite cheap as well. Your nuclear is much cheaper than ours. So the cheapest way to produce a kilowatt hour of electricity is some category of renewables. Now, up until now, the challenge has been, yes, but that renewable kilowatt hour occurs when the wind blows and when the sun shines.
So we need a power storage
and therefore we need storage. But the storage is now getting cheaper as well. So look, I think there are bits of the economy where in order to get to net zero, there will be a cost. And we've got to accept that cost. I think, for instance, there's no way to get to zero carbon cement without having higher cost cement. There's no way to get to zero carbon chemicals and therefore plastics without having slightly more expensive plastics. But I think in the electricity system, we do have a way of delivering electricity at the same or lower price than in the fossil fuel system.
So to make it more competitive in the market.
And then the other thing which is important is when you use electricity, it's far, far more efficient than fossil fuels, because you have to remember, take an electric vehicle. When you drive an internal combustion engine vehicle, diesel or gasoline, only 25% of the energy in the fuel tank actually ends up as kinetic energy making the wheels go round. 75% turns into wasted heat, which is of no value to anybody. When you have a battery electric vehicle, 90% of your energy in the battery ends up driving the wheels forward, and only 10% is wasted. So the other thing to realize is that once we start using electricity in many applications, we're going to get a fundamental energy efficiency advantage, which will also be to the benefit of household budgets. So in future, people are going to spend much less money running their electric vehicles than they do running their diesel or gasoline cars.
So still price matters a lot in this kind of energy transition.
Yeah, we've got to focus on that as well.
Also, you mentioned about the power storage part and also about the solar PV, and now we have a very competitive price in the markets. Now some people, especially from the politics part, they would like to amplify the national security part. Or your solar PV, they have the monitoring system, some kind of the rumors or narratives come a lot. So do you think that also kind of obstacle to have this kind of renewable transition?
Well, I mean, this is a crucial issue in Europe, and my own commission, the Energy Transition Commission, has recently published a document which we call Global Trade Issues in the Energy Transition about this. So Europe is very aware that China dominates in a whole series of different technologies, wind turbines, solar PV,
but
batteries.
China is also introducing technologies from Europe.
No, but you have dominated these technologies. That you have led these technologies. I mean, some of them began in Europe. Solar PV, for instance, very strongly driven by German deployment back in the 1990s and 2000s. But more recently, it is China which has dominated. And Europe looks at that, and it has two concerns. First is an economic concern that we want some of the employment and value added in Europe, and we need intelligent strategies to do that, strategies that do not cut us off from the benefit of this Chinese technology, but also don't just import everything. And for instance, we could do that by encouraging Chinese companies to invest in Europe. And then at the other end, you've got to say, but solar panels do not have listening devices. I mean, there's some issues about how it works with autonomous driving, but you've got to think about the spectrum. And what we're going to try and do is respect that each of us will have security concerns in relation to particular categories of product, and we can't ignore that, and we have to respect that, while identifying lots of other products where we do not want, silly security concerns to get in the way of trade and investment flows
Just
that
not to
helps it.
amplify
So
idea.
you don't want to exaggerate. You've got to accept that there's an element of reality, but not exaggerated, and we've got to understand that there are different relevance of national security for different elements. Now, by the way, this has broadly speaking failed in the US. So the previous national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, talked about the US having national security limits on trade with China, and he talked about a narrow yard or a narrow garden with a high fence. You define narrowly what are the areas where there is a national security concern, and you have big barriers on that, but most of the economy is free from that. I think what has occurred in America is that narrow garden expanded and ended up being most of the economy, and they're applying supposed national security limits on all sorts of things where there isn't national security. So I think what Europe has to do is to try to get a more intelligent way where there will be a minority of products and services where there is a national security concern, and there will be constraints on both trade and investment, but we need to limit those to that particular set of products and services where there are legitimate issues. And legitimate issues, as I say, which you would have if we were providing it, and we have if you were providing it.
So in terms of the investments in the renewables, especially for the implementation of the projects that needs a lot of cash or a lot of funds or other financial solutions, but now we have seen a lot of developing countries, they're kind of trapped into kind of a dilemma because they are pushing their economy and they need kind of fossil fuel, for example, gas or other issues, but in terms of the investments in the renewables, they rely a lot on the financial markets, also from the international markets. Do you think that the dilemma has any solutions or not? Right?
No, look, I think this is a very important issue, and again, an issue where I hope that Europe and China can work together, also with countries like Brazil and India, etc. But, the essence is that when we think about the large investments which are required to build zero carbon electricity systems and electrify the economy, there are some countries in the world where all of that investment will come from domestic sources. And that includes both the advanced economies of the G7, Europe, the whole of the European Union, Japan, Korea, and it also includes China. You don't need help. You have a very high domestic savings rate. You have a low cost of capital. There are then intermediate countries, let's say India, where there is a high savings rate and where a lot of the capital will come from domestic sources, but maybe there's a role for some development bank lending as well. And then again, you go to low-income developing countries, to Pakistan or to much of Africa, where the domestic savings capacity is not big enough to drive the investment at the pace we want, and where a significant part of the finance will have to come from outside, where some of it will have to be publicly provided, not as grants, but as loans through the development bank process.
And also about the international bonds, because it's a go all in commercial part.
Well, but the crucial thing here is development banks. It's the AIIB, the BRICS Bank, the EBRD, the Africa Development Bank.
Because they have the lower interest
They have
rates.
the lower interest, and also they can operate in ways that reduce the risk and therefore encourage private finance to come in as well.
More like a long-term
So we ought to be able to do that, and provided we do that, I think you are going to see in Africa in particular countries which simply skip the fossil fuel generation. I think renewables are now so cheap, in particular solar plus batteries, that I think you are going to see African countries developing rapidly electricity systems which right from the start depend primarily on renewables. They don't need to go through the fossil fuel phase, which we went through and you've gone through. And we went through it and you went through it because when we started in our industrialization, these other technologies didn't exist. And when you started your industrialization, these technologies were very expensive. But Africa is going to start developing an energy system at a time where these technologies are so cheap that they are the logical thing to use as long as they've got the investment capacity at a reasonable cost of capital. So I would love to see really strong international agreements at COPs and elsewhere for all of the, for China and the rich developed countries to work together to unleash these capital flows into low-income developing countries.
And also, the final question is about the carbon and the net carbon zero society, and many people don't have a very clear picture about that one. So what does it mean for our daily life? Because when we talk about climate change, sometimes it's a little bit far away, unless there the hot summer and we will feel that there's a climate change. But for the zero carbon society or life, what does it mean for our daily life?
Well, look, let's be clear. For a lot of people, it doesn't fundamentally change it, right? A lot of jobs, a lot of people in white-collar jobs, in finance, in legal services, in entertainment, what energy do they use? They use electricity.
Yeah,
right?
all electrified.
So they're already electrified. So the net zero economy simply means the electricity that they're using was made without fossil fuels. That's all that changes for them.
The green electricity.
Yeah. Now there are it's made green electricity. There are other bits of daily life that do change, and they change for the better. Because you end up with electric vehicles on the road. I can tell you that every time I come to Shanghai and I go back to London, in London I'm aware of the noise and the smell of internal combustion engines, which I no longer have.
So you have
here
seen the difference
in Shanghai. Oh, you can absolutely see the difference. I mean, you are miles ahead, and it's just a much more pleasant urban environment when you've electrified the buses, the two-wheelers. It's a much better quality of life. So there are some areas where it won't make any difference. It will just be zero carbon, but the ordinary citizen won't see that because they're still just plugging into electricity. I mean, they don't know where the electricity came from. There is others where it will change, and I think it will change for the better. I think the electrified society is a greener society, not just in terms of we're stopping climate change, but also in lots of aspects of our local environment and the quality of life we lead.